Well, hello. So I'd like to spend some time sharing with you some thoughts around how COVID has had an impact on where we are in PMOs and businesses, and the consequences of that are that many businesses now need to rebalance their business. The plans they had last year are not appropriate to the future. And I think that also means that there is fantastic opportunity for the PMO as well as fantastic opportunity for the business. So this conversation, the thoughts I'm going to share with you here have two themes in them. One is, how does the opportunity that we can grab from the COVID-based changes to the world around us reflect into the business? And how do those opportunities also manifest and translate for the PMO? As a PMO in a business, I should be looking at these fundamental shifts in so many of the factors of our marketplaces and our supply chain and our customer base and our working practices drive opportunity for us. We should be thinking about what the stakeholder portfolio in the business is and what our own component of that is. And that means that we have the opportunity to guide the business as it seeks to understand its options and crystallize those into action plans. So I've got two theme discussion here. One is, how does this affect the business? And the other is, how does the PMO put itself into a position to have perhaps a better role than might historically have been the case? So building our PMO's relevance as a central element of the organisation. That's where we're going. A little bit more about me, not much. I'm easily found on LinkedIn, details at the end of this presentation, and if you're really curious you can track me down there and read a bit more. But I've been in projects since about 79, project leader since about 80 something. I've been in PMOs since 99. These days mostly provide coaching, mentoring and training for people, and mostly in the PMO space. Actually, that's not true. Mostly in the how does a business manage the impacts of change and drive that through to benefits. If you want to know any more about me, you'll have to go and research or just ask some questions. Let's actually dive in though and have a look at our context first of all. So why COVID changed the world, or not why, what COVID changed? And my simple answer to that is to say it changed everything. And if your immediate reaction is to say, well, actually our business is not as changed as you might think, then what I would counsel you, what I would challenge or question you to ask is, if it didn't change you, but it changed your supply chain, your customer base, cultural attitudes around you to things like ways of working, how long can your business continue to operate in the way it did historically? So even if COVID had no direct impact on you during lockdown, how will the fact that the whole of the rest of the world around you is changing have impact on you? And that's really the first place that I want to start to engage your thinking in terms of what does our business need to do to be ready for the inevitable and emergent future that's ahead of us. So to summarize that, last year's plans are unmatched to the opportunity to gain from the options that we're now facing. And if we continue down the path that we were on, it's unlikely that that will continue to be as beneficial as we once thought it might have been, because our world has changed, and in that change is opportunity, and in that opportunity we have to consider how we approach what we're going to do. And I've got three circles on the slides here because I want to talk about three levels of appreciation of change. The first is single loop learning, which is the idea that as we move forwards we continuously attempt to learn from experience and apply that to the plan, do, check, act cycle of continuous process improvement. So how can I make my process that I use that delivers my capabilities and meets my organizational vision? How can I improve those processes through the evolutionary process? In fact, Plan, Do, Check, Act is not the right phrase. That was Stewart's phrase, but Deming, who picked it up and made it famous, changed it to Plan, Do, Study, Act. Interesting how the C is more prevalent than the S. I'll give you an example of the ways in which I think that things are no longer in a Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, and that is working from home. Now, not everybody can work from home, but every business has people who can work from home. I've heard stories of businesses with managers who could work from home and production hands-on workforce who couldn't, thus introducing a imbalance between those people who felt safer and those people who felt more at risk, for example. So it's no longer just a case of how do we improve our processes. Some of our processes and our operations are fundamentally changed, and that gives rise to something that perhaps has been called double loop learning. And if you want to follow that one up more deeply, go and look for Chris Argyris. If you Google him, you'll find him. And that's the idea that we have the same mission, but we have new operations for it. So in the way that Plan, Do, Study, Act, perhaps for process improvement, breaks down when we start looking at things like new ways of working, so working from home because we have the technologies, we also need to then move on beyond the single loop and ask the question, well, we've still got the same mission, but how do we deliver that? And many of us have discovered over the last 12 weeks, as of 14 weeks, something like that, as of the time I'm speaking to you. By the time you're listening to this, it will be more like 20, I think. We've discovered that we can use new operations to deliver pretty much the same mission. Our mission has obviously had big impacts upon it. Many organisations have shifted into keep the lights on activities, and if you haven't already as an organisation also shifted into the idea of where are old revenue sources no longer viable, but where are new revenue sources viable, then you're at a disadvantage in relation to perhaps some of the other players in the marketplace. And I'm not going to say competitors here, because I think who our competitors are has now changed as well. So what I actually want to do in the third picture is introduce the idea of triple loop learning, which is asking the question about adjustment to what's our mission. And this is a much more complex, I think, journey, as is illustrated by the animations in the graphic. So if I'm adjusting my mission, instead of all those coordinated things that previously amended their behaviours together, I think we've got amendment, we've got adjustment, we've got fundamental change in terms of omissions and additions, and sorting that out in organisations, as I'll talk about in the next few slides, is quite a challenge. So the question, the challenge is for the business, what now and what next? And in the interest of time, I can't explore all of that, and in the interests or in the practicalities of your organisational needs and purpose, I don't know what your organisation needs and purpose is. I don't know what your context is. So I'll give you a meta model, I'll give you a route map, or I'll give you a way of planning a route map, but I can't plan your route map for you. But hey, I'm very, very happy to have conversation post your having been through this stuff and saying actually it would be useful to have some conversation about how to put some of what comes next into action. But what comes next is the how to respond, and I'll give you some examples of time frames and how we might go through the Imagineering process that I hope you can populate. And if that's a bit of a leap, then and we can chat through that, and you can always reach out to me more directly should that be necessary too. So what now, what next? I think the how to respond is a set of steps that we can describe what the steps are, what the targets from those steps are over what sort of time horizons, and maybe some of the techniques that sit inside all of that. But the specifics of what are relevant to your organisation are not so predictable here. So what we're talking about doing here is building up a cadence and a rhythm, a process or a set of steps and iterations and refinements. And if that sounds a little agile to you, then the paradigms of agile or indeed program management are entirely appropriate here, because this is suck it and see territory. This isn't plan it all in advance territory. This is experiment and see what works. This is look for opportunity and grasp it. As I said just now, many organisations will have shifted into keep the lights on mode, where the aim is to generate enough revenue to pay the payroll and probably not a lot else. And the reason for doing that is to maintain the body of staff in the organisation, because it's the body of staff that are the organisation's powerhouse for being able to thrive in the future. So if you can't survive in the short term, you can't thrive into the long term. So we need to establish a cadence, a routine that starts to view opportunity and not just survival as what we're really pursuing. And we need to build that mindset of survive but also think to the future into people's heads, because putting it in any form of plan that is paper or electronically based and produced by one person is useless in many different ways. First of all, there's absolutely no way that one person is going to see all the opportunity that's out there. And secondly, just the traditional problem of single person planning does not create any motivation and coordination amongst people. But that's a different topic. That's just basically how do you do planning. Something that came out of 9/11, a long time ago now, isn't it, 9/11? But something that came out of 9/11 were those organisations whose business continuity and recovery plans worked best were the organisations who gave their people freedom to respond inside a loose guide that ensured that there was either coordination or recognition of the point at which to escalate and seek that coordination. So organisations that had very tight plans, the plans failed because the world did not match the plan. And people could not enact what the plan said because the world just didn't follow it. There's apparently a quote in the Swiss Army Manual that says, when the map and the terrain differ, believe the terrain. I've heard it re-expressed recently as when the map and the terrain differ, you cannot tear up the terrain, but you should tear up the map. So what we want to do is establish the idea in people's minds. We need to do stuff now to survive. We need to look to the horizon. We need to build into what are our opportunities and how do we then capitalise on that. And that, I suggest to you, is a process of gathering innovative thinking patterns. And innovative does not have to be practical, at least not in the first flush, because that's about being divergent. It's about imagining a world different to today by asking the questions about what does the world change, or how has the world changed. I'll give you two examples that I've heard recently in conversations. One was a hair care products company. So it had the production capabilities for producing substances to put in your hair, and it didn't take a lot of effort for them to change the substances to put on your hair to substances to put on your hands to kill COVID. And they have decided that their future may still include hair care products, but they'll build a different production line for that. And the one that has been converted to healthcare products will continue, at least for the foreseeable future, which with UK government purchasing contracts that are now emerging is a long way into the future. It's not months, it's years. Another was a car parts manufacturer who had converted their production capabilities to personal protective equipment, PPE, and was selling to the healthcare industry, and decided that the healthcare industry was a lot nicer to deal with than the car industry, and is having the conversations about whether or not it will ever go back to the car industry as a supplier, because it's enjoying being a healthcare industry supplier so much more. So those two organisations have been divergent of where they were. Your organisation may have opportunities and threats that generate ideas that you would not at this time think of implementing. But those ideas, when combined with possibly other ideas, start to lead you on paths that may be attractive. So the cadence, the journey needs to be, we're in a routine process, cyclical process perhaps, of imagining what we could do and building options. And as we build options, we need to start shortlisting those, because it's the shortlist that we bring back through convergence to the things that we're actually going to do. And we could talk in PMO and business terms in terms of backlogs and Kanban and sprints. And it's not my intention here to run an agile course. So if that's vocabulary you don't know, you can go and research it. I'm just going to summarize it by saying we build lists of options from which we select the most attractive at any point in time. And the building the list is thinking widely, diverging, and the taking or prioritizing of what we're going to do and taking action on them is converging. I'm also going to throw another question in there, which is, as a business, and I'll come back to this theme in 15 minutes time, 10 minutes time, as a business we need to be considering what are the tests by which we say, yes, this is something we should be pursuing, an entry test, and how do we determine as a business this is generating benefit for us and is now business as usual, is now operational, is now the annualized benefit and budgeting stream, and is no longer requiring support of a development function, no longer requiring support of a PMO. How do we do all of that? Might be through things like workshops, interviews, plenary sessions. So the short answer is it's all about interactions, and the more widely we encourage our organisation, the people in our organisations, to interact with each other, the more widely we get people to express the options that they see and the pain points they are feeling, then the more ideas we'll throw up into that backlog, into that open list of things that we can pursue if we chose to. So we're going to generate a backlog, which we then execute on. We go through the feedback cycle of reporting. How did that work? Phrases that I might throw into here are things like minimum viable product or spiking, which are just ways of saying things like prototype, suck it and see and try. And we should be, I think, as a PMO, bringing to the organisational table the idea of having a set of horizons. And I'm going to propose here this week, next 3 weeks, so this week plus next 3 weeks is a month, at least in lunar terms, this quarter, this half year, this year. Now, something I want to say around this to try and contextualize it is it feels so blindingly obvious to me from 40 years of projects experience and 20 years of PMO experience to talk in terms of these rolling horizons and the steps and techniques of working forwards in this manner. But I recently watched some YouTube videos on Agile HR, and you can find the same video very easily if you wish to. If you just go onto YouTube and search for Agile HR and Sky Broadcasting, and you'll turn up a 20-minute video of a young lady having a conversation with the HR director in Sky about how they have adopted agile practices. And again, I'm not trying to make this an agile conversation, but the HR director had said, well, what we did in implementing this was we went out and we interviewed people and we got lots of diverse opinions, and then we ran some workshops where we fed the results of the interviews, which gave us these very broad opinions back, and we came up with 3 or 4 shortlisted ideas. And I was thinking, yes, okay, and what's innovative in that? But it wasn't innovative for me, but it was hugely innovative for them. They put it in terms of agile vocabulary, and it gave them great value. And they were in a discipline that was not projects oriented, and for almost everybody in a PMO, there's a large part of your organisation that's not in a projects based world, and so does not see as a natural way of working these ideas of I've got a horizon of a week, a month, a quarter and a half year, and I do different things in each of those horizons because I'm looking to the future. I'm not in the middle of a cyclic, siloed process. So if you're sat as a PMO person thinking, yeah, that's a really obvious observation, just ask yourself the question, is it an obvious observation for the rest of the organisation? Because the rest of the organisation has just been thrust into the situation where they have to cope with change. And you're the expert in how to do that, and they are finding themselves in a situation that feels quite different. So you naturally, as a PMO person, as a projects person, a program and portfolio person, have an opportunity to go and have a conversation where you can guide them through what's alien for them but comfortable and familiar to you. And I would suggest that on our PMO front, we should have a view outwards from today that says, how do I move my PMO, or how do I evaluate if I want to move my PMO up the value chain? I think a lot of PMOs complain, that might be the wrong word, about being treated as a reporting admin function and have an aspiration to be supporting benefits realisation and portfolio project selection and those sorts of things. So we should be using the same time horizons, and we should be asking the question on the daily basis, where do we want to go, what do we want to do, and is today one of the days in which we adjust the year ahead or the 10 years ahead, and we should be transporting that same question to the business. So I'm going to give you a little bit more in terms of route map before we've finished. Like, go and have that conversation with the senior leadership in the organisation, and don't presume that they don't understand how to move forwards. But if they have doubts, then there's an opportunity to offer to help them. So week one, what's the old normal? What's the new normal? Where do we go? So week one of thinking about how does the PMO move on, but equally week one of considering how does the organisation move on. And actually I really fervently hope that week one of this was 10 weeks ago or 20 weeks ago, and that the organisation is on the pathway. In which case it's still week one for you if you have not been participating in that journey and supporting it. It's still potentially week one for you to grab the opportunity. So the first thing to do is the stakeholder bit. Identify who to see, go and see them. Go and see them, often appropriate in terms of interviews. Now, go see does not, in the old paradigm of get on planes and trains and into cars and offices, etc. It means Zoom and Teams and any of the other tools. Have you, for example, been looking at tools like Miro and Concept Board, etc., all of which integrate video with a whiteboard? That's different from Zoom, which is integrating a whiteboard with video. But when you turn the equation up the other way around and you have really powerful conceptualizing tools there with built-in techniques, then you get a very different situation. So go see these people, but go see them is a completely new thinking paradigm. How do I go see them? What toolkit do I use to go see them? If it's a mural or a Miro or a concepts or there's so many of them I can't even think of all the names now of these tools out there. Are they in your armory? If not, then you need to be adding them to the armory of the organisation. It's not just the folk who advertise on mainstream TV like Microsoft and Microsoft Teams that have got really good tools out there. Then run some interviews and some workshops and gather in the questions. Who has an interest in the future? Who has a vision of the future? Who has pain points? Who has gain points? And then if those things were to be realised, then what must they contribute to the achievement? Now, I think there's a weakness, and I don't want to turn this into a how to do stakeholder analysis discussion either, but I do think that there's a weakness in most stakeholder advice like you might get in something like this. So this thing tells you go and identify your stakeholders and find out what they want. It doesn't then say, and and make it clear to them what contribution they have to make, both to the project and the PMO, in order for success to be achieved. So I'm going to just reiterate this point and say that when we go out and see people, we're asking them, where's your pain? What can you see on the horizon that's opportunity? Okay, let me add that into the list. And then we're saying, out of this list, which things do you think are worth pursuing sufficiently that you will make a contribution and a commitment in terms of your own personal energy, decision-making authority, and resources. And it's only the stuff that gets a tick in all of those boxes that is then viable to take forwards. There are a couple of other things that we better just mention here, which is the old normal may still be consuming resources in the organisation. The old normal may have been put on hold as a result of COVID activities when really it shouldn't have been. So we've probably got, we have in most organisations now got an old portfolio that has a number of flaws in it. Things that we should be putting a lot of time and energy and effort in because they are the future are not being pursued with as much energy because they have not been brought front and centre and prioritised. Things that were ongoing that should have been stopped completely have not been. Things that were ongoing that do have a future may have stopped without appropriate attention having been paid to how are we going to pick them up again. So there's definitely a PMO role here in terms of how do we close down the stuff that's old normal and we shouldn't be pursuing. How do we put the resources back that are freed up as a result of that back into a situation where we can deploy them on other things? How do we accelerate the things that were always there but are now more vital? And how do we introduce and bring on the things that are options where those opportunities require second and third degree, secondary and tertiary loop learning, such that, well, we've never done this before. Is it something we are equipped to do in the future? Or, gosh, I never thought of myself as being in the pharmaceuticals industry or the hand care industry. I thought I was in the hair care industry. The only thing that's really the same is we put chemicals in at the front end and they go out the back. They go out of goods dispatched in plastic bottles, but there's a completely different chemistry in the bottle. I was going to quote some other examples there, but I don't think they'll add to the understanding, and they will add to the time. I think that, therefore, as a PMO, I'm thinking anytime I start having this conversation with the organisation as my week one, I've also got an end of month one and an end of quarter one and an end of half year one and an end of year one. So where on this slide I've illustrated week one results, your takeaway should be and week 2 and week 4 and week 13 and week 26 results. So my week 1 results here is I've started to build that divergent list of all of the things that we could be doing, and I've recognised that people's thinking is still a little trapped by their history, and we need somehow to be organising those sessions that get people into thinking modes that are outside of the box, to use a very old phrase. I also want to start thinking about drafting my PMO and maybe even projects implementation plan and document support, etc. More on that to talk about in the next few slides. I'm maybe looking at some milestones. That's my what have we achieved by weeks 13 and 26. And in the parochial sense of the PMO, I'm saying what skill sets does that need. So that applies not just to week 1, but week 2, week 4, etc. I don't know how far out your horizon is, so I put 200 in the title of this slide. But week 20 might be far enough for you. 4 years, week 200 may not be far enough, I don't know. First thing I'm going to say along the lines of this one, though, is if we start talking to the organisation about be innovative, then actually we have to have that conversation with the leadership community in the organisation. And what we need to be saying there is you need to support people to be innovative. You can stop it, but you can't create it. You can tell people that you prize innovation, and then each time they put an idea up, you shrug your shoulders or you say something that is less than enthusiastic. You'll teach them very quickly that that's not the case. The moment you start prioritizing production targets over restoring old production targets over, for example, understanding whether or not we are in an industry that continues to be viable. So one I would quote there, for example, is what's the future of office-based property in dense city centres? Because an enormous number of organisations have discovered that staff who are working from home are more productive. They have discovered that people working from home have problems with boundaries between work and life. They have problems at home that they don't have a desk and a chair and high-speed internet connection. So there is all sorts of innovation that comes about there, in terms of we don't spend the budget in the building an office block or populating an office block, but we do spend the budget giving somebody a collapsible table and chair that can go in a spare bedroom, and we commission the final 100 meters of fibre to go into their building, for example. So asking people to be innovative from a leadership perspective means encouraging and supporting people, because idea generation is not something that can be switched on by telling somebody to be innovative, but it can be switched off by having the wrong attitude. Also recognise that there will be people in the organisation who just cannot come up with ideas, but they may well be very good at taking somebody else's idea and evaluating it, or they may be very good at implementing that idea, but they would never have had that idea on their own in a million years. So do not expect the people who come up with ideas to be good at evaluating them as to what works and what doesn't, or implement them. So recognise people who are idea generators, people who are implementers, and people who are filters may be different people. If you've got somebody who's all three of them, then watch out that they haven't already left you to go and start their own business. Or perhaps that's you and you're the CEO or MD of an enterprise. Something else that COVID has illustrated for us that the Imagineering bit needs to recognise and take account of and start to think about how do you apply it is attitude to risk. Now, it's been the case in many organisations that if you wanted to do something like, for example, you're the UK National Health Service and you would like to change doctors' surgeries from face-to-face consultation to video-enabled consultation, you can plot out a set of milestones and a route map that says within about 2 years we can have piloted this and we can have learnt from the pilot, and then we can spend the next 5 years rolling it out. So we've got a 2-year program to pilot with a sort of 5 or 7 years in total to deliver. Or you can just discover that COVID comes along and do the whole thing in 2 weeks. So there was a different attitude to risk in those two cases. One of them was, let's work out where we're going so that we can remove the risk. And the other was, let's get on with it, do it, and when we find something that doesn't work, fix it. The Japanese car industry rose to prevalence over the American car industry through the sort of 70s by taking the view that every time the production line has a problem, you stop the whole thing. You don't produce any more cars with a defect in. You work out what the defect's causes are and you remove it. And then all the rest of the production doesn't have that fault in it. And we've just seen a very large scale or global example of those two extremes of the risk process within organisations. So you should find fertile territory in your organisation to say, boss, we could manage the risk the way that we always did and we could take 6 months over everything. Or we could manage the risk the way that we did for COVID and have 90% of stuff sorted at the end of the first week. Your choice. Well, I wouldn't put it in those terms. I've got the advantage. I'm just giving you a conversation over a video. I don't have the consequences of putting it in those terms. So you'll have to phrase it in a better way. Okay, well, we're nearly done, really. I just want to talk a little bit about what does the portfolio and the PMO life cycle look like, because portfolio is definitely what we need to be considering here. It's not about the project life cycle. It's much more about the portfolio contains programs and programs contain projects, and we need an asset-based top-down view. Even if we create that view bottom up in terms of response, we still need as I put it on the slide here, a whole of estate view of how we use the resources that are available to us. So I'm just going to draw this very standard life cycle, but not as you'd have it in the project management body of knowledge, because that's the bit in the middle. But we are going to have to be building our divergent list of things that we can do and converging that into a list of things we are going to do by taking a portfolio view, where the view of that in that portfolio is inclusive of resources being used for operations excuse me, and resources being diverted into project activity. So there's the activities both for the PMO, if it's going to be set up because you don't have one, or is going to be amended because you have the aspiration to be in a different place, and of the projects that you are going to seek to bring into operation of, is it desirable, viable and achievable? And that's typically done by qualification and description in a charter. There is an argument that a PMO should not have a charter. I would believe that if organisations treated PMOs as organisational units in the same fashion that they treat the finance department and the procurement department and the L&D or HR departments. That's a lot of initials, isn't it? I don't think they do treat PMO in those terms, and until they do, I'm going to still say that a PMO needs a charter. I think that's the same as there should be a phrase that say all lives matter. There is a phrase at the moment that says Black Lives Matter, and it's entirely appropriate and necessary, because there is a tradition that the correct phrase is not properly understood and properly applied by everybody. So there's a bit of a need for focus. So I'm going to say that projects and programs and PMOs need charters, and I welcome the day when the PMO doesn't need a charter. Charter is from idea through to approval for qualification, when we start to spend a little bit of extra time and effort. So that's, in terms I've spoken about so far, that's from idea went onto the backlog to the divergence is converging down to a short list of ideas, and then the justification bit is perhaps the selection from the short list of the ideas that we will pursue by committing resource to them, and the phrase to use there is sanction. At this point, I would expect to have plans, milestones, roadmaps, whatever you want to call them. By plan, I do not mean necessarily detail of what every person does on every day. I mean a set of steps into the future that are achievements that we know we want to achieve, and that may actually be a list of things that we could achieve and is not crystallised. Then we have the bit that is typically a project within the project management body of knowledge, or the Prince manual, which is the point from sanction to acceptance. And then there is the bit after acceptance through trial up to project closure or program closure, and then through product use, where I have put that test that I mentioned to you earlier, which is the benefits test, or the project and program exit, which is the point at which we say this is now under annualized budgeting and doesn't need to be treated as a particular and specific initiative. So I've drawn a life cycle there that's much broader than the typical project life cycle, and it's also broader than the typical program life cycle. And I'm proposing to you that as a PMO, that's the life cycle that you support with the business, and in supporting that life cycle with the business, you are now moving into the territory of enterprise and portfolio and benefits service delivery, in which case as a PMO you should have a service management plan or a service catalogue, so PMO management plan and service management plan that reflect those service types. Now, this is absolutely standard PMO territory, so compared with the background I've given you on the other elements of conversation here, I'll just whiz through it. So service management plans should describe the procedures or possibly processes. By procedure, I mean detailed and specific set of who does what step on what day. By process, I mean the generic description of how the PMO delivers its results. That means estimated resource needs per service delivered, which means that stakeholder conversation about what do you want as a service and are you prepared to commit your efforts and resource reach to its delivery. Service management plan should say things like who carries out the stuff, so roles in the generic or process orientation, or names and specific in the procedural bit, when it happens, what the dependency or the trigger or the constraints are, whether those constraints are traditional, discretionary, or are mandatory, sort of laws of physics, etc. And the tool I would recommend for the modelling of this is the Six Sigma Supplier Input Process Output Customer tool, which you might know as either COPIS, being customer-centric, or SIPOC, being steps in the flow-centric. So we should be building, whatever we're doing as the PMO, whether we've existed for years or are new, we should be looking to the organisation to say, let's rebalance the portfolio. In rebalancing the portfolio, we may well be offering the business services that we haven't previously offered, and in doing that, we should be building the service management plans with the component parts that are on screen here. Even if you haven't built this sort of documentation and guidance in the past, now's a good time to start. So that's really the call to action for you. So action taking. There are some resources here in terms of the presentation, the video that you've just watched, which I'm going to wind up in the next minute or three. And it's all about, in terms of takeaways, in terms of the bonuses and the tools. You've got the slides. I'll put some template ideas around some of this stuff as well. But otherwise, the things to really take away are the business needs the awareness to ask the question, is tomorrow's execution operations benefits flow the same as yesterday's? That should start with how, as the leadership community, do we serve our people and encourage them to see opportunity? And as they see opportunity in changing markets and opportunity and new ways of working, how can we adapt and capitalize on those opportunities? That's going from the I see an opportunity through to I'm going to act on an opportunity. We need, therefore, to be producing the plans and the workshops and the service catalogues, etc., both for the projects and or both for the portfolio and for the PMO, which includes things like chartering. It includes things like horizons at whatever time frames work for you. So this is days, 5, 15, 30, 90, 180. Previously I'd said weeks to you of sort of 1 plus 3 is 4, 13, 26 and 52. They may not be the right horizons for you, but you need to understand what those horizons are. And in understanding those horizons, you're taking the organisation on a journey into the future. And that's a journey that I'm quite used to helping people to take and resolve in terms of the meta help of coaching and mentoring the PMO. So I'm based where that little blue circle in the top left hand corner is. That's Edinburgh in Scotland. But with remote working, I can work anywhere, actually across quite a wide geography, like anywhere. So I provide consulting, blended learning, and competency development. I approach it from a very different perspective from the one that was in the book I pulled off the shelf here. I don't think training delivers very much value to organisations. I particularly don't think that qualification-based training like PMP provides an organisation with much value. It completely provides the individual with value to be mobile in the jobs market. But if you want a different view of how as an individual you become confident and comfortable in your role, and how as an organisation you deliver the capabilities both across the time frame, across the departments and across the hierarchy of the organisation, then come and have a conversation, because I'll bring a different description to the one you're used to about how to do competency development across the organisation by using people working within their job streams. So that's 46 rather than 45 minutes, but 1 minute and 45, that doesn't seem to me to be a huge percentage overrun. My contact details are here, and I'm very willing to engage in dialogue with you. So thank you very much. I hope that's been useful to you, and goodbye.